gun control measures. Some, like Beto O'Rourke, are demanding outright gun confiscation. But not everyone on the left is on board. Jason Nichols is a professor of African American Studies at the University of Maryland, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks a lot for coming on. So we don't agree on much. I think you're a man of good faith. I love having you on this show, but we sincerely disagree, I would say, on most issues.
Absolutely.
But in talking off the air the other day, you said something really interesting to me, and I wanted you to explain it more fully for our audience, that you're not reflexively on board with gun control measures.
So there are some common sense gun control measures that I think make sense. Even limiting the capacity of a magazine. We saw, for example, in Gilroy, California, where a guy had a 75-round drum connected to his weapon. I'm against that. I don't think we need silencers. I think we need universal background checks. But gun confiscation goes way too far. When we look at the history of gun control in this country, it has been to keep guns out of the hands of black people. And that's indisputable fact. I would point anybody to Adam Winkler's work out of UCLA. As a matter of fact, when you go back to the antebellum period, it was to keep guns out of the hands of both enslaved and free African people. And then you go to Roger Taney, who wrote the infamous Dred Scott case. And one of the things that he said was that he didn't think that black people had rights that white people were bound to respect, in part because he thought if you extended those rights, that they would have the rights to carry and own guns. The Ku Klux Klan, the infamous terrorist group, conservative terrorist group, regardless of party.
But a Democratic Party group. I mean, if we're being honest about it.
Well, but they're still conservative Christian.
They were, okay, but I'm saying they were Democrats.
But at the same time, that group were advocates of gun control. So I think, honestly, when you look at the history of the issue, I think that, African-American people should be a little leery about people wanting to come around and take their guns.
You think? Yes, I'm sorry to laugh, but you make a compelling case because what you're saying is factually true.
Absolutely.
And this is a non-racial point. It's just a point about human nature. But when you want to oppress somebody, you disarm him first, of course. And you've seen that in totally homogeneous countries where race is not a factor. But the first thing the government does is disarm the population before doing something horrible to them, obviously. So because what you just said is so clearly true, why is it so rarely said out loud?
I'm not exactly sure. Some of our civil rights heroes that are oftentimes not acknowledged, whether we're talking about the Deacons for Defense or we're talking about Robert F. Williams, I'm not sure exactly why people don't state this. I think
Martin Luther King for gun control?
Well, Dr. King at one point was certainly a gun owner, and at one point they actually said a journalist nearly sat on top of a gun in his home and called his home an arsenal. So,
Martin Luther King's home, an arsenal.
Martin Luther King. But at the same time, there are organizations that have worked against black people that are pro-gun, and they're pro-gun control when it comes to black people, like the NRA. So that has a very
I would say I'm not here to speak for the NRA, but as someone who believes in the Second Amendment, I believe it's a universal principle that applies, it goes without saying, but I will say it explicitly, that applies without regard to race, of course. It applies to all human beings. It's a God-given right, the right to self-defense. And I think most people of goodwill believe that. How much crap will you take for saying something so obvious on this show?
I take crap every time I'm on the show from one side or the other, so, I think I'm prepared for the crap.
You're prepared for it. Professor, thank you very much for coming on. I hope that people can rise above the partisanship just for a second and meditate on what you said, because I think it's absolutely true. Great to see you.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.